Today we are doing things just slightly differently. We're thinking about, we've been in a series thinking about our buildings. And this has opened up for us an opportunity for us to reflect about not just our buildings, but also our community, the way that we do life together as a family. And I've been finding it really great as taking the opportunity. And it seems as if it has stirred up stuff amongst us, which has been really good for us together as a church family too. And we've gone through a whole series of different weeks. And do you remember we've talked about refectory, we've talked about... for those who are new here, we've used the concept of the monastery, or the image of a monastery, or the metaphor of the monastery, in order to explore what are the varieties of different spaces that they had that we can just check and see whether we're functioning in the same sort of way. So we've looked at chapel and refectory, eating together, about library, about learning together, about cell, about our inner life with God. We talked last week about garden and about our place of work. And this week we're thinking about chapter. Now, hands up if you know what a chapter house is. Okay, so very few of us have ever heard of this phrase before. A chapter house, if you go to Wells Cathedral, this is Wells Chapter House. Now, you can see it's an octagon. I don't know if it actually is octagon. It might be a seven-sided building. But it's a circular building. And I'm told, really interestingly, that when you sit with your back against the wall, because it's designed with seats all the way around the edge, it works really well to talk really naturally. Everyone can hear you without a microphone. As long as you don't shout. If you shout in this room, it doesn't work very well, because the acoustics get distorted. But if you talk really normally and confidently, then it works. Also, it's in a circle, and you don't see the person opposite you. There's a pillar in the way. So you're always having to talk to those around you rather than kind of confrontation. It's very different from the House of Commons, for example. A different way of being a community together. To contrast. Very different from Sunday morning, where at the moment you're looking at the back of each other's heads and our faces. So this is a circular space, and a very beautifully designed one, that would have cost a lot of money to build. I mean, just think of the craftsmanship that's gone into this space. Why would someone put so much effort into creating a space like this? Why not just put a ring of chairs in the front of the chapel or something like that? Why create a special chapter house for discussion and decisions to be made? A chapter is a group of clergy who would get together. So this is the cathedral chapter house. So all the clergy from across the diocese would get together, sit around the edge, and they all have their particular seat and then make decisions together. They needed a circle space where they could chat quietly and respectfully with each other. Beautiful. So today we're talking about chapter, and I've asked Jim to come and share with us a few thoughts. I'm going to ask Jim to say a bit in a moment, a bit about why he thinks I've chosen him to say that. But St. Michael's is a sign of hope in the heart of Twerton. And we want any development that we do in this building to be a sign of hope of the future that is coming. We are a foretaste of the destination that the whole world, the whole of creation, is heading towards. Which means that our community life is a foretaste of that destination. It is by your love for one another that you will be known my disciples. Why? Because we're headed towards love, and love is on its way. The world is changing, and it's changing towards love and reconciliation and justice. So we need to be a people who foretaste that, who give a sense of that right here, right now in our community. So we're a sign of hope in the midst of Twerton. Sign of the future breaking in. Sue and I have been married for almost 25 years. We're celebrating our 25th anniversary. Thank you very much. Are you clapping me or clapping Tory? I'm not quite sure. Yeah. Tory. And it is one thing to be one. And it's another thing to be united. You can be technically one, but not completely united. We will be celebrating in a moment our unity, our oneness. It is with one bread that we share, and we are one body. And yet, as a Christian community, we often find that it is difficult to be constantly united. And yet we know from Scripture that God's blessing falls on us when we are united. Would you take your service sheet and look at the white one, not the green one? And just there's a short reading that Tori was going to read but doesn't have to. We'll read it together as one psalm. This is quite a short psalm, Psalm 133. Let's read it together. How good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. It is like precious oil poured on the head, running down on the beard, running down on Aaron's beard, down on the collar of his robe. It is as if the dew of Hermon were falling on Mount Zion. For there the Lord bestows his blessing, even life forevermore. We're not familiar with the imagery of oil being poured upon a priest's head or a king's head, being poured on his forehead. But imagine that image of oil being poured, and it would fall down your nose. It would run off your nose around, and then it would come down your beard and then onto your collar. And they would anoint you not with a little sign of a cross and just wipe a little bit of oil on your forehead. They would pour oil over your head as a sign of your anointing for priesting. Aaron was the high priest, the first priest. And they would do this with King. King David was anointed. And it was a sign of God's blessing on you. You have been called. You are anointed. And you would know what that feels like if you'd been anointed. And everyone else would see, but you would know what it is. When we dwell together in unity, it is like we have been anointed. And yet, we discover that it is hard to be united, as in a marriage, in a community. It's difficult enough when there's just two of you. Multiply that out by 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, 100. And the issues become more complicated. How do we remain united together? So I've asked Jim to come along and chat this thing through. And maybe, Jim, you just tell us a bit about your interest in the area of conflict resolution and reconciliation.
Okay, well, Rich has basically said all I was going to say, so that's handy. No, I suppose I have an interest in this ideas around conflict transformation and seeing. Thanks.
These are yours.
I've now got this.
Control,
so
yeah.
Authority.
It's in your hands.
I've had an interest for as long as I guess I can remember. Some of it came out of a broken place where, when I've spoken before here, I've shared a little bit about my history and my past, and My parents died when I was younger, and I often felt a sense of wanting to really manage any relationships that I still had. Me and my brother lived with another family, and I was always wanting to make sure that relationship was safe, not risk anything, just kind of manage it properly. So it wasn't particularly a healthy thing, but it was a kind of an interest of seeing the relationships okay and functioning, because I was worried about what might happen to me. I've only realised this kind of looking back. I was worried about my own security, my own place, if those relationships weren't there. And then since I've become a Christian and allowed, I suppose, tried to open myself up to healing and to reflect on sort of God's love for me, but also that God can heal those hurts, can take us back to those places and sort of help us work through those and process them. I've realised the power in it and the hope in any situation that things can change, that things can be transformed. And I suppose that's grown, and I've got a professional interest in that. I'm a researcher looking at peace-building processes in Africa, and I'm particularly focused on ways in which communities gather and how international organisations might be able to facilitate that rather than trample all over it. So I kind of have a professional interest of trying to understand how these processes work, what's helpful and what isn't. And then I also have I suppose a personal passion really to see relationships right, to see relationships and community where people risk and take chance to sort of be known and to know one another.
That's brilliant.
That's an ad hoc answer, I don't know.
So we've got someone who's been thinking about this for some time, and I thought it would be good, rather than me just talking, it would be good to kind of ask Jim some questions, and then he will kind of share his heart, and then maybe I'll respond to that, and then maybe we'll be able to pick up from that something that what the Spirit is saying today. So get us going. Jim, why is it so difficult to get along or to be a true community? What do you think?
Okay, well, is that slide showing? It is, isn't it, I think?
Yeah.
And I can't read it, so hang on. It says, conflict is inevitable, but combat is not. And conflict happens for reason or reasons, and it can be an opportunity for positive change. So who would agree that conflict happens? Has anyone had a week where there's not been any kind of conflict? And I don't mean fighting, I mean as in disagreement, as in bringing different perspectives, arguments, discussions, debate, that kind of stuff. Does everyone agree that happened? Has anyone not had any conflict this week?
I can't imagine that being the case.
No, and it's an inevitable thing, and I've already forgotten the question Richard asked, but I think it was, why is this so difficult?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Okay, so yeah, basically conflict's inevitable. Now the thing about chapter is it's quite a helpful thing because it helps us, as we think about us in our community, that's us lot. In fact, I wasn't there, but this is on Facebook, so you can find it yourself, tag yourself in it. Is a lot of people, there's a lot of us all trying to be part of this same body. Rich has talked about the idea of unity, and that's not just within this church, it's within all the sort of churches and believers and followers of Jesus within Bath, within Somerset, within the country, within the world. We're all part of this one body. That's what we're told a number of times in the Bible. It's what we believe, that we are all part of this one body. Yet there is a lot of fallout, let's be honest, a lot of disagreement, a lot of discussion. And this can be helpful. It can help us. Here's another picture of us lot. We all have different personalities. We all have different hopes. We're all members of this church for different reasons. We're all in this church right now for different reasons. We might not be members. We might be just seeing what's going on. And we've all got our different stories. We've all got our different pasts. We've all been hurt in different ways. We've all been encouraged in different ways. And we've all got different dreams. And of course, we all see situations from our own perspective. So my interpretation of something that happens is different than Luke's. It's different than Claire's. And we all see things differently because of what's happened to us. Has anyone ever had a time where something fairly nothing-ish happens, sort of a bit innocuous, but it really makes us angry? It really presses a button in us. And we respond, and we don't even know why we're responding. But if we take a moment to reflect, we look back and we go, wow, all that person did was, I don't know, offer me a cup of tea. But for some reason, I've got really cross, and I don't know why. Like, there's things that go right to the core of us. So it's difficult, because we all bring all of those things, each of us, and we're all trying to do something together and pull together in one way. Did you have a question then, or should I just carry on?
You keep going, and then when
right.
Yeah, that's good. You're doing well.
It's well rehearsed, this.
I feel like you're in flow.
So the piece that we did earlier. Now, I was for a while ago, I was looking at the piece and where it comes from, and I don't know lots about the history of it, but it is about, the idea is that you would find someone it's an opportunity to find people in the church community, people in the family who you might have a disagreement with. Maybe there's been, I don't know, a crossword, or maybe you've just not seen each other for a while, but it's a chance to seek them out and to shake their hands and say, peace be with you, and to sort of break through any sort of barriers that might be existing there. And I think that if we're going to be this sign of heaven that Rich has referred to, if we're going to be a sort of a foretaste of what God might be wanting to do amongst us, then we need to be looking at ways to make decisions well, to live in community well, to understand one another, to listen to one another, to give each other the best chance, the best opportunity to go deep.
Okay, so how do we do that? That's our desire. How do we create a culture that helps us to go deep? Well, what do you recommend?
What do you recommend? Dunno. Shout some ideas out if you like. What do you recommend? Being honest? Chapter house?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, creating a space to do that, either literally or metaphorically, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's two good starters. But yeah, to be honest, and that implies relationship, it implies having conversations, it implies listening to one another, and the things I'm going to talk about a little bit later in more depth, but things around grace, that we're forgiven, that we're imperfect, so we're going to make mistakes, so we need to have grace with other people. To keep short accounts, to even try and work out what that means, to keep short accounts. If someone's annoyed me, it's kind of I'll keep short accounts, I forgive you.
When you say short accounts, what are you talking about?
Exactly. What am I talking about? I don't know.
Keep short accounts.
Yeah, keep short accounts. So,
what do you mean? Give an example of a short account, or go on. Yeah.
So if Anna, she's not here, so I can say.
She's watching the video though, so I tell you.
Yeah. No, we've had a hilarious 24 hours about the most conflict we've ever had, which I suppose is predictable. Misunderstandings, me not really hearing what she's saying, trying to fix the problem, but then she can then bring that to me and raise it with me, or she can maybe say, "Oh, Jim might be a bit stressed because he's thinking about this morning or something," and so, okay, well, I'll let that go. Or, for example, if I come into the house and, this sounds hilarious, but say I come into the house and it's a bit messy, I could be, "Oh, why is it messy?" Or I could go, "Oh, it looks like they've had a real fun time," and just be like, let it go, and then, I don't know.
So there's letting it go, bearing with one another, but then there's also like being short accounts. Sounds to me like you might bring it up quicker than letting it stew on. Is that right?
Yeah, so there's a bit in, where is it? Don't let the sun go down on your anger.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that when we're in relationship with people, to be able to go to them, to be honest with them, and to say what it is that's bothering us. Who finds that easy?
None of us finds that easy.
Are you doing my hand signs?
Mm.
I'm going to keep short accounts of that. They're sort of copying every hand motion I make. Sarah and Nikki are. There we are. So I'm being honest. Anyway, I've totally gone off the point here.
Let me ask you another question. Have you seen examples where people have created the opposite kind of culture, where they've created a culture where there is others and distance rather than closeness and togetherness?
Yeah, okay, so when we were thinking about how to structure this, I wanted to go into a little bit of depth about how these things can break down, because we're all here together, we're not fighting each other, we are in a kind of unity, we're in a degree of unity, we're all together, and it seems pretty happy room, we're all okay. But the way we make decisions and the way we resolve differences really will define and sort of shape the culture we create, so that when things do get a bit more tricky, when things do, well, inevitably, as relationships deepen, we then open ourselves up to be hurt by other people a little bit. So the scary thing about falling in love is that can then open you up to being hurt in the most intense, deep ways. It can be wonderful, but it can be painful, the most painful thing possible. So if we want to be in deeper relationships with one another as a community, then we are potentially opening ourselves up. So, and this is where some of the thinking and the research from the kind of peace-building, reconciliation type work kind of comes in, because it basically talks about the idea of enemies or foes, that they're not just there, they're created. We're not born disliking or hating. So I'm thinking of extreme examples here, but that these things can grow, and they happen for a number of reasons. So here's a slide. So who knows what that is? It's Israel-Palestine, and it's the wall that's been built between those two communities,
yeah.
two nations. And I'm not going to make any comment on what's right, what's wrong, and we all probably have our opinions and our views on that. But the point is, that is not a good result, is it? That there is the only way to live a secure life is to have a massive great wall like that. And you can see some of the scale of it. I mean, it's incredible. But how do we get to that kind of thing? Well, so there's a few phases and a few stages. So one is separation. So the idea is that we see ourselves, there's differences between us and other people. And that part of what happens with that difference is we build these kind of negative ideas around these people. And because we've lost that sameness, we are tempted to compare ourselves. And inevitably, we want to justify ourselves because we do. And so we kind of see ourselves as maybe as better or as right or as correct or as them as wrong. And then if you follow that through, we can end up sort of dehumanizing people. So we see them as this sort of other thing, this thing that isn't the same as us. And by extension, we see them as not being recipient of the same grace that God gives us.
We were reflecting on how tea and coffee after church on Sundays has the element of separation about us. We're like sheep and goats. We go to the tea's on that side, coffee's on that side, and the tea lot don't talk to the coffee lot, and the coffee lot don't talk to the tea lot because they're not like us. They're different, those lot. Every now and again, you get a bumping in the middle, somewhere in the middle. You get some, I'm meeting a coffee person. But over time, you can see that if you're always over there and you're always over there, and you never get to chat to them over there, they become a them, don't they? Do you see how that can be very subtle? Those over there.
It probably happens as well with the sides we sit on, because who tends to sit on the same side every week? Okay. I know I do.
Yeah.
And we all have our reasons, but it's just a habit forms, doesn't it? And you can, in fact, I think there's probably people who, I recognise the faces of people who, because I've been coming here 3 years, and I've not even had conversations with you. I mean, that is ridiculous, and I'm sorry for that, but that is what can happen, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, there's people here I've not had proper conversations with. I don't know the names of everybody that I'm looking at. Yeah. And that's some people because they're visiting, but it's other people who I've seen week on week on week on week. They might be tea drinkers as well. But and I'm sad about that, and I'm sorry, and let's work out ways to not do that.
Okay, so we can form them and us, and that can grow, and obviously Syria or Israel, Palestine is an example of those things. Rwanda, those are the massive scale. But in our own personal scale, sometimes that can lead to disappointments or anger. Do you want to say anything about anger?
Yeah, I do. I'll give a couple of examples, just something I was thinking of an example of this. So it's not only that we might not talk to each other, but so I was helping lead the kids' work last week, and we went out in the garden, and we were doing some gardening out there. It coincided with a baptism, which is obviously very exciting. So it coincided with people wearing very beautiful dresses. Now, I was aware, reflecting on this, that it's not ideal to mix children in beautiful dresses with gardening in a muddy thing, right? And I think I noticed some kind of, maybe some like fox poo or something as well. I mean, so there's the potential for, well, getting dirty is quite high. And so I was just thinking, now, there wasn't a particular incident, but I was aware it's totally feasible that someone might be a bit annoyed that they went outside. Maybe I thought of ways we could try and tell each other in advance, but of course there's going to be a tension because there's a baptism. And so it's totally feasible that people could be annoyed that we were going outside that week. And then, so they're a bit annoyed at me, but they don't really say anything because they think, oh, well, I'll just let it go. And we've talked about letting it go, but that's not always the full story. But if what happens if, say, then they sort of say hello to me and I maybe don't hear them, or I'm distracted by my girl, so they might feel a bit hurt about that. They might not want to, and they might know they should just get over it, but they start to get this sort of opinion of me, maybe that I'm a bit aloof or a bit arrogant or a bit distant, I don't care. Maybe they've seen me here for 3 years and haven't spoken to me, so they think, well, what's his problem? Right? So those things can then grow, and if those things keep happening, misunderstandings can happen. Well, they can really, there's no relationship there. There's a real breakdown. And so there's potentially going to be, well, if that happens in a few different places, it could cause some real problems. I mean, I was thinking of this, another thing, I've had friends in the past who are very, very prompt with their timekeeping. And I'm really not that prompt with my timekeeping. I'm normally like about 4 or 5 minutes late. That's an issue. I know. I don't want to be like that, and I'm going to try and work out how not to be like that. But a friend of mine, he did eventually raise it with me, but he was really offended because for him, if you were late, it suggested you didn't care about that relationship, you didn't care about that friendship, and that was to do with his parents always being late when he was a kid, and that really affecting and impacting him. So there was a kind of a knock-on thing, and so if we hadn't nipped that in the bud, there could have been more of it could have been a breakdown in that friendship or that relationship. Now, you asked about anger. So I'm going to go on to the next sheet. Who's felt angry here? Ever?
Let's own it. Let's own it, everyone. Come on, put your hands up. Come on.
Who's felt angry when they've been like, I know I shouldn't feel angry, but...
Yeah, who's feeling angry right now? Okay. Yes, mildly.
I found myself feeling angry at comments by the Chelsea football manager. Like, actual anger. I was like, what? Who cares? So football's an interesting one because I think football gives us a window into these strange passions, these strange obsessions that we have, these strange feelings that we might not feel in any other part of our life. I felt anger then. It was pretty intense compared to some of the other stuff I could have felt angry about over the past however many years. So it's an interesting one. So we feel this anger. Now, anger can be useful because anger can point to things. It can show that we care about something. Mm-hmm. But we have to not... So there's a quote here from a lady called Scylla Elworthy, and she's worked in some pretty amazing kind of peace-building organisations that work with a lot of local organisations to build relationships and trust and to work through some pretty difficult situations. But her quote was, and she's American, which you'll realise in a moment, anger is like gasoline. If you spray it around and somebody lights a match, you've got an inferno. But if we can put our anger inside an engine, it can drive us forward. So it can be something that's very combustible. It can be like, if you're feeling angry, you only have to get the wrong look or the wrong comment. And I mean, you see this in a town centre on a weekend night, Saturday night at midnight. People are scrapping and they're fighting because there's some anger in there, and they're just often looking for a way to express it or something. So it can be a light, but it can be an opportunity to break down things, as a way to understand a little bit about something that's deeply going on inside. But we have to work hard to find what's at the source of it. And I think sometimes at the source of it can be a fear, there can be shame, there can be insecurity. We have to sort of get beneath it. And the question is, how do we do that? And do we dare do that? Because sometimes it's quite nice to feel that righteous anger, isn't it? Yeah, I know it is. I'm right, good.
I guess that's the problem for us as in relationship with each other, is that it might actually be right for us to feel angry about things, but then we have to work out how is the best way of dealing with that anger, even if it's a right response to a bad situation. We're not going to be able to sort that out now. But do you want to say anything a bit about forgiveness? Because forgiveness is a counterintuitive way of responding to things that are rightly deserving of anger. Yeah. A bad thing demands a response or gains a response. But forgiveness undercuts that and changes it. So do you want to say something about forgiveness?
Yeah, okay. So firstly, there's one response to anger, which is... to acknowledge it and engage with it and to try and make light with it. So that's that wall between Israel and Palestine, and that's one example of some graffiti that's been done. I think that was actually done by Banksy, but there's loads of other examples where they've painted on or pasted on a kind of a view of this, I think it's I can't really see, is it like a seaside type thing from here, and like some mountains. Okay, so this idea that you can see through it, but it's kind of making the point, what's the other side? Another response to it was a Christmas card. So you've got the three wise men there trying to get through to Bethlehem, and what does that do? Well, it makes the massive point that it just feels wrong that it's come to this situation, that there's this wall in the way. So that's one response. Can be a sort of almost a prophetic, creative response. And I need to stress at this point, just because with talking about forgiveness and talking about decision making, there's different ways. I'm not talking about a forgiveness that just diminishes or removes the need for justice. I'm not talking about forgiveness that suddenly makes abuse okay. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how because there's a forgiveness component to some of that stuff, but it's a whole nother sort of issue. So please don't hear me as trying to belittle any intensely painful and hurtful situations. But one of the things about forgiveness, and the words that one of the words that's used for it. So when Jesus in Luke, he talks from Isaiah, and he talks about freeing the oppressed and setting the captives free. Is that right? I can't remember the exact words. But the Greek word is this word aphesis, which means forgiveness, and it's often used as a word for forgiveness in the New Testament. So there's something about forgiveness which is to do with release, and it's to do with freedom, and that can be a release and a freedom for ourselves. It can be a release and a freedom from the burden of what might be very painful, but it's also about releasing someone who's wronged us, releasing them from our judgment. It doesn't take the pain away. It doesn't mean we trust them again necessarily, but we can release them from our judgment, because we're saying, God, you're the only one who can judge. I'm imperfect, but I'm enough. Everyone's imperfect, but your grace abounds. We all make mistakes. We do wrong stuff. And when we try and live together in a community, we're going to hurt each other.
I found that really, thank you for that. When we were preparing for it, Jim shared that idea that forgiveness means release. And I hadn't really, I didn't know that. A bit irritated that he knew about this that I didn't know.
Forgive me.
But I found that a really powerful thought, that forgiveness is about releasing someone. And I thought about the people that have hurt me, and I thought about releasing them. And that felt good, although hard. And maybe there are people here who you need to release. People in the room you need to release from the things that they've disappointed you with. What would it be like to be a group of people who have released each other from the debts that we built up over time? So thank you for sharing that. I'm aware of time a little bit, and I'm just wondering whether we might talk. What do you have another thing to round off? Maybe your kind of where you want to get to right at the end, or the most important.
I guess. What do we do with this stuff? What's a practical way forward? And taking two examples we've talked about before, just previously. So one is the gardening and the clothes. Claire, you said about being honest. And we need to have a culture where we can approach one another and we can talk to each other when we've hurt each other. It sounds very simple, and I've been in so many different groups and friends of churches over the years, and you talk about being in a community where we can challenge one another and be open. Mm-hmm. But is that easy? No way. It is painful. And one of the reasons it's painful is I think sometimes we shortcut. We kind of gallivant and gallop towards I'll bring up my issue with you, but we don't do the step that comes first, which is to actually do some of the work in ourselves, to actually take that anger and work out what it is that's caused the anger, to work through something around forgiving someone, releasing that judgment over them. Because when we're talking about someone bringing that issue to me about the clothing and outside and it feeling a bit insensitive or whatever it is, that's because we want to make the relationship right. We want to go beyond just releasing and sort of the forgiveness that means that I'm free from that, but we want to make the relationship stronger and deeper as a result. So that would be one example, would be to actually understand yourself, what makes you angry, what presses the button, and then be able to talk to that person, and then to be able to listen to one another, to know that we've all got different perspectives, to know that we all bring our different stuff to this situation. In terms of the power of the releasing things, there's a quick story just from when I was in Sudan. We were praying with a guy who actually went through a process of forgiveness of a witch doctor who'd cursed his family, and through praying with him and being with him in that, he was actually healed. He hadn't been able to lift his shoulder above here, and he was healed of that in that time. And not every physical thing that we experience is to do with an issue of forgiveness. Of course it isn't. But there are sometimes we carry things. There's a lot of evidence around that there is a link between stuff that's going on in our emotions, in our minds, that is linked to our physical being, and that can be aches and pains, or it can be illnesses. Not in every situation, it's not always the case, but it can be powerful stuff. So this stuff about release is to do with that. One other quick example is just in if you're interested, that book is brilliant. Don't Forgive Too Soon, and it goes into a lot of depth in a really readable way. So these guys here, both fathers of girls who've been killed in Israel and Palestine. One's a Palestinian man whose daughter was killed by a soldier. She was 4. The other is an Israeli guy whose daughter was killed by terrorists when she was 14. And they are both campaigning, and they've realised through their own work, through their own time dwelling with that stuff, that the way forward is not to carry on fighting, but to actually talk to one another and to listen to one another. And they're in this film called Within the Eye of the Storm, and it's a wonderful, wonderful film. It slowly walks you through their experiences, and they do a radio show together. But it's about talking, about listening, about humanising the other. And they go and they meet these Palestinian terrorists who are wanted on a large scale by a lot of, certainly the Israeli security forces. And the Israeli guy shares his story. And these guys had never really met an Israeli before who wasn't someone who was like a soldier or trying to cause them problems. So the fact that he sits and shares his story breaks down some barriers. They talk about having heard this in a way they'd not heard before. They talk about thinking of things a little bit differently now. They talk about having seen and understood the impact of some of what they do. And it's powerful stuff, and that's through talking. There's examples in so many of the, very quickly, the Northern Ireland peace process. One of the things they did to try and bring the parties together was when they gathered the leaders of the different factions in a house somewhere, the guy who was running it basically sent all the kind of the staff that might help with the dinners and the teas and coffees home, because then they had to make each other cups of tea, which was the first step in kind of breaking down some of that otherness, some of that separation. Similarly, in South Africa, where the early days of breaking down apartheid, ANC people meeting with some representatives from the government, from the white minority there, were holed up in this. Well, they met over every 6 months in a house in England, and one of the things that happened was over time they put their rooms next to each other. So the leader of the ANC against the guy who was representing, and they were fighting over the table in the conference room. But at night time, they were in a room next to each other. So they bumped into each other in the hallway. They rearranged the rooms to make sure people were next to people that they wanted to bump into, because you then get to see them as a person. And over the years, they saw each other as close friends and collaborators, and it was a real significant part of breaking it down. And just to say that lots of pictures I haven't had time to talk about. Psalm 23 is a bit of an example where we don't have to fear this stuff. So Jean-Paul Lederac, who's a ninja in peace building, if you can have that, he talks about this being in 3 steps. So you've got this first stage where God prepares, God prepares us. He wants to, and that's that initial stage I'm talking about, where he wants to get us ready. He wants to do the work with us. He wants us to be at peace with ourselves, to be at peace with him, reconciled to him. Yeah. Then he walks with us. He leads us into this uncomfortable place. We go through this valley of darkness. We sit at a table with our enemies. I mean, talk about a contradiction. Sitting at a table which, when we talked about the refectory here, is a place of hospitality. It's a place of sharing and knowing and sort of being open. Mm-hmm. So we can sit there, we can hold that tension between. And then from that's a different slide. From that, good stuff flows, good stuff happens. And so that God has a heart for this, and Jesus certainly has a heart for this. And it starts with us in here, and it can work out in our communities, I think.
Thank you.
One thing just to say that I meant to say and didn't, is that we can't do this stuff on our own. We can't, if you've been hurt, even just on what feels like a superficial level, and it's easy for me to sit and say, yeah, just go and talk to the person. It's like, well, sometimes it's not that easy, especially if you don't have much of a relationship with them in the first place. So sometimes we need to actually do it with someone we trust to get someone to help us. And some situations need more of a formal version of that they need someone to actually actively mediate and help set things up. So don't feel like you have to do it on your own, but just pray for discernment to know who you can trust, and with someone you can trust, maybe you can then raise issues that need raising. So you don't have to do it on your own. That's I think important.